Okay, this is a special episode of The Pursuit of Ownership. First off, I have hijacked your Wednesday segment, so thank you, Aaron and Tyler, for allowing me to do this.
We weren't asked.
You were not asked. I was like, "Hey guys, we're recording tomorrow. Let's make this happen." And we have a special guest with us today. We have Peyton Keller. Peyton, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I never would have thought this would have happened, but here we are.
So you are a D2 at Texas A&M in Dallas, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And we are recording this in like the week and 1.5 of COVID quarantining, social distancing. So I thought this was like so timely, what you had posted on our Facebook group. You posted a Google Doc of your notes from the Shared Practices podcast. And we need to clarify, we said last week that it was all 5 seasons. You've taken notes on seasons 1 through 4, like detailed notes of each episode. And this document is now, as of today, is 105 pages long. And it's pretty incredible. It's pretty intimidating. It's a lot. I'm kind of like dreading reading through some of this because I'm like, oh crap, what did we say back then? But this is amazing. So tell us about this. Where did this come from? How did you decide to do this, and how long did this take you?
Yeah, so definitely was a long time coming. It actually all kind of started when one of my classmates was like, "Hey, we should kind of learn how to value practices." So what I did is I went through, I can't remember what episodes it was specifically, but it was the ones with Hunter Smith about practice valuation. I went through those 2 episodes and I made a practice valuation 101 is what I called it. Just a 4 or 5 page Word doc that gave you pretty much everything you needed to know about practice valuation, at least at a surface level. And after I did that, I was like, oh, it's kind of nice to have these thoughts, on a page and easy to find, within a Word doc. So that's when I started going through the whole podcast. I'd already been through the podcast, just listening to it before. But I was like, man, like I know there's so much stuff that I didn't catch on, just listening to it, whether I was, in the car, in lab, at school, wherever it was. So I started taking notes on it. Just on a Word doc. I think it was last fall. And I just got through season 4, kind of right before this whole coronavirus situation happened. So that's where we are now.
So that's pretty impressive. We're now, 3 months into this, into this year. So essentially in 6 months, you've gone through the whole podcast again and taken detailed notes. And this has always been one of our things, is like a podcast is not a very easily consumable, it's like just the sheer quantity of hours to like re-listen and find one little tidbit of information. And we've thought about, like, do we hire someone to take detailed show notes and then translate that into a document or PDFs? And it's just been one of those things that we've never been able to execute on. So did you sit there and like have the episodes going and you're taking notes, or were you like doing other stuff and then you'd like pause it and take some notes? Like how did you actually go about this?
Oh, this hurts me to say, but yeah, it was me sitting in front of a computer, Word doc open, just cranking it out.
What a nerd.
What a nerd.
What speed did you listen at?
I would say it was like 1.2, maybe 1.5 sometimes.
Wow.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
Because this is how George used to listen to podcasts. Like George said, if I'm listening to a podcast, I've got my notes out. I'm sitting at my computer because he like didn't have it on his phone at the time. Yeah. So he was listening to it via iTunes or via the computer, and he was like ready to go. So if there was 5 minutes of banter, he was like PO'd by the end of that 5 minutes. He's like, guys, I need 50 minutes of actionable content if you've got a 50-minute episode.
And if it's not dense enough to write it down, it's not good enough.
It's not intense enough to write it down.
Notes. Yeah.
Well, so I love this because this is kind of in the spirit of both shared practices, what we were trying to do. And in dental school, I was the Google Doc guy for our class, where for every exam, I would create a Google Doc of like the study guide and what we were supposed to study. And everyone was like, oh, we're so grateful for the Google Doc. Really, I just created the doc and everyone else filled it out. So it was my lazy form of studying and collaborating. But and the A+ students, the oral surgery, people who like wanted to beat everyone, they wouldn't use it because it was like B to B+ material that ended up in the Google Doc. So if you wanted to like truly ace it, you needed to study the source material on your own. But having these collaborative notes was so it like brought our class together, and it was so useful for me personally because I got to benefit from everyone else's show notes, or, essentially of the class. So thank you for doing this. First off, that's the number one. Thank you for spending the time to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad that I could help out.
So I now wanted to go through, and we're not going to rehash all of the seasons, but I wanted to see what your takeaways were season by season and what questions you have. And let's talk about some of these things. And some of it is going to be funny because in the current light, like looking back, like we've learned and we're now, it's one of those things where you're like, if you're learning how to do dentistry and you're to go back at your first preps and look at those, you're like, oh man, that was so bad. So, we're going to do a little bit of self-diagnosis here and figure out if, what we said was incorrect or if we've got updated information at this point. So let's start with season 1. So you are in dental school. You are a D2, which is pretty amazing that you've been this deep on all of this information at the D2 level. What is your plan for post-graduation until practice ownership? What are your current goals, and what did season 1 give you on those goals?
Yeah, so as of right now, I'll probably either end up somewhere in Texas or somewhere in Florida. I know those are both, very general, big areas. But I'm a big city guy, and I know that I'm not willing to sacrifice where I want to live to, make a lot of money. So it'll probably either be Dallas, Fort Worth area in Texas, or South Florida, kind of Miami, Fort Lauderdale. That's where my girlfriend's from. So she would like to go back there, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's probably going to happen. I'm just being honest with you.
Yeah, I know. I mean, but of all places, I can't be mad about that. Yeah.
No,
So,
I'm in Indiana. No, I've it's been 11 years. We've boomeranged back, and it's depressing, rainy, and flat. And there's a lot of good things, but I knew this was coming eventually. So just embrace it.
Yeah. I grew up in Nebraska, so I'm used to the cold, windy, wet situation. But
Nice.
I've had enough. So,
Nice.
but yeah. So after school, either Florida or Texas. I think ideally I'd probably like to get some experience. I don't really necessarily have a strong preference as to whether it's private practice or, some corporate job. But 6 months to a year, and then start looking for practice at that point. Obviously, I'd probably be looking before that. If something good really pops up, then I'd be willing to jump on it sooner or later. But with, those big saturated areas, when you see something that you want, you have to go for it quick. Otherwise, someone else is going to jump on it.
Okay, cool. So I love that you've got, that 6 months to a year, but then you're going to start searching. You're not going to jump straight from school into practice ownership like some of us have done or anticipated to do. But for you, were you in state at Texas or out of state?
So I was. I went to Texas Christian. Yeah, I was in state.
Okay.
So I went to Texas Christian University, which is over in Fort Worth, which is about 45 minutes away from Dallas, where I am now. And when I was at TCU, I got my in-state residency for Texas, just because I knew I wanted to go to school here, and it would really increase my chances of getting into school.
Okay, cool. So your debt load is going to be, I'm guessing, 200-300 plus, maybe?
Yeah. So I actually have an interesting situation. So I'll come out with no debt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I am forever thankful for that.
Okay. So, and we don't need to dig, and I should have briefed you beforehand that if there's ever anything on the podcast you're uncomfortable talking about, then just let us know.
No, it's totally fine. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go around bragging about that, but
you just did on a podcast.
I mean, you did. You made a public statement.
Yeah,
I don't know. Put it on record.
No. And I'm not saying you're bragging. I'm just giving you a hard time. But yeah. I mean, being in that situation is pretty amazing and allows you to do things and take on more debt sooner with a greater sense of confidence. And me being a military HPSP guy, it's a pretty amazing feeling to come out of dental school with no debt. So that's awesome that you've worked that out. So and Texas in-state wouldn't have been unreasonable anyways. So
it's about
no
that
matter
range,
what,
Richard. It's like 250, 300 now if you're taking full loans.
250, 300.
Yep, that's the general ballpark full loans for Texas school.
Texas schools. So were there any, okay, so debt is not driving you. I think that one of the things from season one, one of our hypotheses was that debt should be a driving factor in your desire to learn and to be a good practice owner and to be fiscally responsible, but it shouldn't keep you back. You're in the situation where it's not a driving factor, it's not keeping you back, you're good to go. So were there any season one light bulb moments for you in terms of that journey from graduating dental school to practice ownership, in terms of committing you to practice ownership? It sounds like you always kind of knew that you wanted to be a practice owner, but was there any moments in season one that stood out to you?
I don't know if there's anything necessarily that stood out to me like super strong. Probably the thing that stuck out to me the most was the interview you did with Derek Williams just a couple months after he'd been in ownership.
Yeah.
And it just kind of makes you realize like how big of a jump it really is going from straight from school into practice ownership. I mean, granted, it's a big jump regardless of if you're doing associate to owner or school to owner. But just knowing how prepared Derek was and still seeing like it's hard, it's nice to see that other people have done it, but it also opened your eyes to maybe I want to get a little bit of experience, just before I take that jump.
So did we actually delay your timeline in ownership?
I wouldn't like
because that's
before discovering this podcast, I really had no idea what timeline would even be. But just seeing some people, like I feel like I'd like to get some good CE in before jumping into practice ownership, whether that's taking implant pathways. I don't know if I can say that, but I just did.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, doing some implant training, doing just some more CE, and really investing in myself that first 6 months to a year out of school, just so that when I do make the jump, I can make the most out of it.
No, for sure. And it seems like both George and others have echoed that same sentiment, that early practice ownership, like straight out of school, has slowed some of their clinical learnings. And I'm the same way, where I just know that like I can't jump into big surgical cases without a mentor at my back, without having done it and screwed up and knowing how to clean up my messes. Aaron and Tyler, you guys have both taken. How far are you guys into implant pathways at this point?
Done.
Okay, so what would be your recommendation there on timeline of that? You've done this now in dental school.
I'm showing Richard my certificate from implant pathways. As
you got an honorable mention. It's a white piece of paper with honorable mention written on it.
It was impromptu. Yeah.
Oh, it's good.
Session 4.
You guys haven't done the surgical part yet, though, right?
Yeah, they didn't let us do that. Yeah.
We were there.
So were you like assisting or shadowing? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so we assisted, and Chris Epperson, good friend of ours, he was tossing us he's great. He was tossing us the camera, and so we were doing a lot of photography, just going around, hopping to different ops and seeing what they were doing, which in a way was actually kind of an advantage, because obviously we weren't really getting our hands dirty so much, but we were seeing all the different things that they were doing instead of just being, in one op doing whatever was available for that day with that particular patient. So we were kind of getting a good idea of the breadth of all the surgery was going on that day. So we saw a good bit. I feel like we learned a lot, even though we weren't, physically doing things. So.
Okay, cool. Are you going to, when you graduate, then go back and do just the surgical portion again? Like what are your plans post-graduation with that?
More than likely. Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. I would definitely want to. It's not to say that, I wouldn't be willing to get into implants without going there and doing it in person and just doing, simple. I mean, I know what a predictable single tooth implant looks like. but I would definitely want to get in there and, just be in that situation and be on the doctor's side of things and, just go legit and actually do the course. So that is my plan. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So Aaron, what's your perspective on doing aggressive CE like this in dental school? Has it changed what you're doing surgically in clinic and what you're exposed to on the clinical side and what you're getting out of dental school? Or has it just made you feel like I can't wait to get out?
Yeah, so there's two sides to that. So there's one interesting thing about our school. There's this one particular professor that it's like a pre-prosthetic surgery selective. And so I did quite a few cases before I actually went to implant pathway. So a lot of things that I was seeing there was already, degloving the mandible and things like that. Those are already things that I've already done myself. So it's interesting to see like their perspective on it. But it did give me the confidence to where I think if I went out, I could, take the session 4 again and get pretty quickly into implants actually when I'm going to get out of school. Yeah. But the other CE that me and Tyler didn't do this, but me and Clay did is breakaway. And so I did that 3rd year, and looking back on it, I think I would wait until, just before I was graduating 4th year. So it's a fresher in my mind, and I could quicker implement it once I actually get out into practice. I feel like information is a little bit stale at this point in my brain from that 3rd year. Make sense?
Yeah, and I think one of the takeaways I took from breakaway is dangerous in an acquisition, because you go and learn all of these systems, and Scott's a phenomenal educator, and they all play together and fit together so well. It really gives you the courage that I can do this. Here's something I can fall back on. You then go acquire a dental practice, and all of a sudden, none of those systems are in place. And you feel this like angst of like, oh, well, we could be doing this breakaway style. We could be doing this here, here, and here. And you want to go changing everything, which is the worst thing you could do. So I think breakaway is good because it gives you a foundation, a set of systems that you can use. But then it can backfire as well if you then try and like retrofit your practice into a breakaway style practice immediately, and give you a lot of angst about all of the systems that are broken quote unquote in your practice and could be improved, 5% or 10%, but they're not worth it. And you're going to burn people out, and people are going to quit and get frustrated with you. So, sorry, this was a tangent. This whole show is tangents, and that's what it's meant to be. But Peyton, do you feel like that was, with implant pathways and other things, is there any other CE courses that you're thinking about that you'd like feedback on or thoughts on?
I don't have anything else like specifically in my mind right now. Obviously, I still have a little bit of time before graduation, but I was planning on, maybe early or late in my 4th year, trying to do those first 3 sessions of implant pathways just so they're fresh, and then getting that 4th one done right as I graduate, just to hopefully get some good confidence to be able to place simple implants.
Okay, cool. Well, let's go into season 2 then. So you've already stated that, you were interested in practice evaluation. Let's put you on the spot and have you teach us back, because you created a document you taught from your class. Teach us about practice evaluation right now. Whatever you can remember, you can use your cheat sheet if you want to, or just kind of hit the highlights. Let's do that.
Okay, it had everything you need to know about practice evaluations. I remember
there was not a single thing that was missing. No, I'm just totally kidding.
Forward it to me, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I kind of went through like basics first. Different terms you need to know: revenue, profit and loss, accounts receivable, those kind of things. And I made sure to distinguish between gross cash flow and net cash flow, because those are 2 very different things. Talked about, where different amounts of overhead should be allocated to your expenses. Importance of, those fixed expenses can really, if those are out of hand, that can really be a nail in the coffin as far as acquiring something, specifically with staff costs. Broke into demographics a little bit, hygiene ratio, and then EBITDA and cash flow valuations, instead of the classic percent of collections.
Okay, so figuring out the terms, how to process all those. Have you started looking at practices? Have you actually taken this and then started to do valuations?
So I have not. I wouldn't say I have with any real seriousness. Every once in a while, I'll hop onto a broker site and just see what's for sale. But I feel like with brokers, you're getting such a picked through selection of what's could be available or is available. Um, I feel like I'll definitely end up doing the whole, mailer campaign wherever I end up going, just given that it's probably going to be a saturated market. I feel like that's probably going to be which way I'll end up going. But yeah.
Okay, cool. So Aaron and Tyler, having done, when did you guys start doing practice valuations for us? At what year were you in dental school?
D1.
D1?
Yeah.
D2?
Yeah.
And how many reps do you feel like it takes to build that muscle of feeling comfortable looking through practice numbers?
Go ahead, Aaron. He's better at it than I am.
To get it, it probably took at 15 or 20. I had a general sense of how to handle it. I don't know at point where I was like, okay, let me look at this real quick, and now I can get a good gist if this is a good practice or not. So I don't really have a good number of that, but I think the 15 range would be like, okay, I got a handle on this. This is making more sense. Peyton, do you have the spreadsheet, the shared practice financial spreadsheet?
So
that makes everything so much easier.
I think I do. Yes, I think I do.
That'd be a plug for something George made that's super helpful.
That is available on the site.
Yeah, actually, I have it right in this shared practices folder on my computer.
Yeah, I think the art of chugging and plugging in the numbers and parsing out where certain things go is something that took a while to really get comfortable with and understand what categories things really go into. But getting just sort of an intuitive sense of what a good practice looks like and what more specifically what a bad practice looks like just diagnosis by exclusion. That happens a little bit quicker because you start figuring out the trends in practices that just don't cash flow that well or wouldn't cash flow following an acquisition, which it usually comes down to fixed expenses more often than not, specifically staff. Really, if you see really high staff costs, it's just okay, well that's
if you have 40% staff costs, you're like, I'm very scared.
I'm not gonna go calculating EBITDA if you got 40% staff costs. I'm like, okay, that's a pass.
Yeah,
hard pass.
Yeah. No, and I love that you guys have shared that. And you wouldn't think when you look at George's spreadsheet, it almost seems like, well, yeah, this is intuitive. What's the big deal? In fact, I showed this to someone when I was at Tufts a few weeks ago, who was teaching their practice management course, and she had a spreadsheet that was actually more in depth, but it allowed you to tweak things. So it wasn't taking a listing and plugging in the data. It was like, if you were looking at your ideal practice, what would you put in here? And it was pretty overwhelming. It was a lot of information. And I was like, this is amazing because it's showing all of the nuts and bolts and all the different ways that all these expenses can influence your practice. But I love George's spreadsheet because it takes the next step, which is valuing practices. That's the thing that if you want to acquire a practice, we want you to be dangerous enough to know where the bad ones are and to know which ones are worth investing the due diligence of hiring someone to help you with valuation, bringing in your attorney, being able to pull the trigger on practice that you're 80 to 90% sure that hey, there's something here. This is worth diving in deeper and looking in more. So I love that you guys are saying it's the skill set of figuring out the bad practices is the first thing that comes as you're doing this. But it takes some reps and it takes some familiarization. And even though the spreadsheet seems simple, the documents that the broker gives you are never the same. They're never clear. It's never simple to just say, oh yeah, here's these exact values that get plugged into these exact spots in the spreadsheet. You have to do some digging and kind of make some judgment calls. And there's a little bit of an art to it. Would you guys agree?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think another thing we should touch on real quickly is the off-market approach and specifically sending mailers out to people. I know in our ownership accelerator, when we were talking about, or when George was talking about mailers, he was giving a much more direct approach on what to actually put in there. Like, hey, this is a specific what I'm looking for, and being more I'm not the word's direct, but being pretty blunt. And after having a little experience with it, after having quite a few friends with a little bit of experience with it, I think the better approach is to be a little bit more like, hey, I'm wanting to learn. I'm willing to try different opportunities, and write your mailer out like that, and you get a much better response that could potentially turn into a practice acquisition out of school, or that associateship that could lead to a acquisition a year or so later. I think that's a little thing that we should touch on that is touched on in season 2 of those.
Okay. Let's talk about that. I think one of the things there is George is first off never one to beat around the bush.
No.
And second off, I think he knew exactly what he wanted and was not willing to wait around and do an associateship or do a transition.
Right.
So if you know you are not willing to settle for anything less than an immediate handoff transition, then maybe that's where the being blunt comes in. You also might have to send more mailers, and it might take longer to find that. If you're willing to court more opportunities that are a longer transition, that are associateship to ownership, and just, are okay talking with more people, then I think you're absolutely right. I think your response rate is going to be much better if, and especially coming out of dental school, or if you're in your final year of dental school, playing that like, I want to learn from you card plays really, really well.
Agreed.
And leading with humility is never something that George has been great at. So we can't fault him for that. So any have you like looked at doing a mailer yourself, Peyton? And it's early, D2. We've had a few people do it as early as D2 year, but that is definitely the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, my thing is I want to figure out where I'm going to live first. Like I don't want to send out a round of mailers and end up not moving there, So once I get figured out, I might consider it. I feel like once I'm getting to, tail end of D3, beginning of D4, I'll definitely be considering something like that.
So the timeline here, I think this is crucial with acquisition and with your patience levels. You're going into competitive markets. How long are you willing to wait for an acquisition? So you start looking at broker listings, you start sending out a mailer. Say that you're a year out from dental school, you've had a decent associateship, you've taken some CE, you're feeling clinically confident, you're ready to be a practice owner. You're in a more difficult market. What expectation do you have for timeline for yourself?
I don't want to say that I would put a hard stop on like 2 or 2.5 years out of school, but I feel like that would definitely be when I'd want to be looking. I honestly was kind of planning on actively looking, before and as soon as I graduate, just
Sure.
because it's going to be such a busy market that if something comes up and it's really that good of an opportunity, I'd be willing to, step into it.
Okay. So, and that 2.5 years, if you got to that point where you're like, nothing has come across that and you really have done the mailers. We talk with people all the time who are like, yeah, I can't find anything to buy. I'm in a crowded metro. Like they have all these excuses, but they haven't done the mailers. They haven't hit the pavement and reached out to brokers and reached out to specialists. They haven't done everything that they could. They've just done the easiest thing to do. But all that being said, hypothetically, are you in the camp of I'm willing to do a startup if that's what it takes, or are you acquisition or bust? So this will lead us into season 3 here.
I think if it was really that there was nothing good available, I would consider a startup. Hopefully I'd have maybe a spouse with another income at that point. But I'm definitely way more leaning towards acquisition if that's an option. The thing that's kind of interesting with South Florida is you're kind of locked in by the Everglades on one side and then the ocean on the other side. So there's not really anywhere to go. So it's not like, oh, you can go to this new developing area because there isn't one. So they have that with Texas, obviously. With Dallas, the further north you go.
Over water?
What's up? Dude, that could work.
You ever thought about a practice over water?
If you guys need another segment, let me know.
Thanks, Tyler.
My contribution for the day.
Yeah, you're done. We're cutting him off. No, I think that's super interesting because, it's almost like a very developed, and I feel like the East Coast is more like that. You're more likely to run into, major metros that if you want to be in a certain area, there's nowhere to go. Like you either have to do an acquisition in a crowded market or a startup in a crowded market, and both of them can work. So it sounds like you're definitely in the shared practices camp of I would much rather do an acquisition. I am willing to do a startup. I think one of the things that this current crisis of COVID-19 has convinced me of, and even a few weeks ago when I was at Tufts, I was talking about people were talking about student loans, they were talking about financing and getting a loan for a practice, and they were talking about how much cash on hand do you need to have. And I was there with Jamie Amos and Steven, his partner, and they were saying, the 5 to 10% that's typically requested. And I made the comment, I said, that is true. However, there are times where you can acquire a practice without having that 5 to 10%, without having that 50K to 100K of cash on hand. And looking back on that, even a few weeks ago, I now am to the point where it's like, you definitely should not get into practice ownership unless you have 50K cash on hand minimum. Because crap happens, and it doesn't have to be a worldwide pandemic that shuts the industry down in an unprecedented way. It can be a personal crisis. It can be a legal issue. It can be something with a team member, or a natural disaster locally, or someone driving their truck drunk at 2 a.m. into your practice. Like, crap happens, and having liquidity for yourself personally, so that you don't need to rely on your practice, and so that you have some breathing room to make decisions as a practice owner, is essential. So I think of all of the things that I've ever said with practice ownership, liquidity and making sure you have cash on hand is probably one of the biggest reasons to not buy a practice straight out of dental school. Not a lot of people have 50 to 100K lying around straight out of dental school, and working for a year, maybe a little bit more, or having a significant other that has an income that can help support you through that. Those kind of buffers and those kind of financial stability pieces, we took for granted because we've been doing this show in a booming market for the last, 3.5, 4 years. And the thing as a practice owner that I guess I'll wrap this up as, you are responsible not only for your own livelihood, but for your team's livelihood. And if you've lived your life and put yourself in a financial position where you have to, where you don't have options when something goes wrong, it's a huge responsibility. So I feel that responsibility now more than ever. So being financially ready for practice ownership, I think, is something that we'll revisit on and talk about in the future on the show. So we won't get into startups because, number one, that was our shortest season. Number two, I think before the call, what was your comment, Peyton, on the heart involved in season 3?
Oh, geez. I forgot. That was like 30 minutes ago.
Our heart was not in it.
He said the passion didn't come through.
Yeah.
He said the passion wasn't there.
The passion was not. Yeah. So that's okay. So let's hit on season 4, and then we'll wrap this up with a quick other conversation here. So the case acceptance season. As a dental student, not seeing patients yet, it's hard to put that all in a context of how am I going to present treatment in a way that patients aren't going to balk, and I'm going to be able to have decent case acceptance on larger cases. Was there anything that you learned or that stood out to you, or questions that you have about case acceptance?
That season definitely taught me that I'm a little frustrated that I'm not in clinic yet, but I got to wait my turn just like everyone else.
Right.
But it was just really cool. I feel like there's a lot of different ways to go about case acceptance. And I thought that was pretty cool to see. Most of them kind of being based on just the fact that you need to be yourself. Like, at the end of the day, you can have a script, you can have, whatever you need to say, but if it sounds like you're a robot, patients aren't gonna like that.
Yeah.
So it really just comes down to, being yourself, saying what needs to be said, and giving patients what they need to know to make the right decision.
That's awesome. I will say, as an update to the case acceptance season, for me personally, I'm now seeing patients in private practice, and I have some work to do around pricing. it is hard for me to like ask my patients for, ridge preservation. Well, the other day I was like, trying to figure out what we charge for ridge preservation. I was like, oh dang, like that's not insignificant. Like that's a decent amount of money. And in the military, it's like everything was free for the patient. So it's like it didn't matter if it was $10,000 worth of treatment or $2,000 worth of treatment. And it's hard for me. I feel guilty charging what I charge for some stuff. And because I'm used to giving it away for free. And that's something internally I need to work through. But I think case acceptance comes with a lot of that. If you've got mental baggage around your fees, if you've got, you're not confident in certain aspects, you need to work through that because it will come out. And being in the military, it's so nice just giving dentistry away for free. And I think that's one of the you can be really lazy about case acceptance because there's no risk on either side. Patient's like, like I get to get out of work and sit in the chair and the work's taken care of. And so that season was just as much for me as it was for any of the audience because it was like, this is something I need to work on. We're going to need to circle back on. And there's I think a career's worth of work to be done around that issue. And then once you've mastered it for yourself, training your team, retraining new team members, re-emphasizing that patient experience and that case acceptance is something that you'll never be done doing. It's going to be an ongoing process. So, well then, let's wrap this up. So we are, a few weeks into this crisis. We're going to be sitting around a lot. As a D2, what are you trying to fill your time with, and what have you found beneficial at this point? And Tyler and Aaron, D3, D4, feel free to jump in here with your COVID plans, especially around CE and other stuff.
So for me, obviously, I spent a little bit at the beginning, getting through this. Not getting through this. Wow, that has a bad connotation. Listening to shared practices and taking notes. But other than that, just trying to read some books, do things that I wouldn't normally necessarily fit into my schedule otherwise. Whether it's just, hanging out. I feel like lots of times people that, are like us and are kind of driven, tend to just keep going and not stop to realize like, hey, like life is pretty good. So just kind of trying to do a little bit more of that. I did Danielle and Austin Davis's. I went through that startup course just because I saw, free content. I was like, well, might as well give it a go. And I did really like it. But that's about it, really. I just, working out, listening to some online CE and trying to enjoy it the best I can.
Okay, online CE. Any free online CE that you've found that you would recommend?
Honestly, no. I like
Daniel and Austin's course is no longer free at this point. They offer it
exactly. I would still recommend it for the full price. I thought it was very solid. But it's no longer free. So
no longer free. Tyler and Aaron, do you have any online CE that you found for free or at a significant discount at this time?
Yeah. So I just want to say, like, philosophically, I think that we kind of are at a really interesting time where, it kind of challenges you because all those times where you say, I would do X thing if I had the time. Now you have all the time in the world and you're going to see whether or not you actually meant that, So like this is kind of the time for me to start thinking about things that I've been saying I was going to do, but I was too busy. So I worked on my mailer. I've been saying I've been working on it since like last July, I think, and I never actually put the pen to paper or anything. So like I got all that figured out. I wrote the whole thing. I hired somebody on Fiverr to do graphic design for it. I got my mailing list and everything. So that's actually getting pushed through, and I'm going to have all that ready to go. Certainly by the time I get back into clinic, probably long before. And then as far as online CE, I've been going through all of the Blue Sky bio videos on YouTube. There are tens of hours of free content on there for learning digital dentistry and all kinds of little things. And they're also starting some webinars next week. I think I saw a few that were coming up on the 1st and the 2nd. Not sure what the conditions are with them, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be free. So look into that. I think that's like on like Blue Sky's website. They're going to be hosting it. And then I bought a textbook, which is kind of weird, but like it's not for school, but it's Zero Bone Loss Concepts by Tomas Linkavicius. He's like this Lithuanian guy. Just put out like this huge textbook on like the transition zone for implants, and I've been taking notes on that and stuff. And that's what I'm doing with like 10% of my time, and the other 90% is like watching Tiger King and doing like the slothy things. So yeah, so that's pretty much how I've been spending my time.
Nice. Aaron, how about you?
I've been babysitting and doing dad things, so I haven't had as much time for clinical CE.
Yeah.
The only recent thing that I saw on Instagram that was interesting is, do y'all know who the disking queen is? The BioClear.
Oh,
yeah, I can't think of her name, but she has a new handle, the Disking Queen Academy on Instagram. It only has about 8 or so videos, but there's some pretty quality videos on there explaining the BioClear method, the burrs they use. It's honestly, it almost sold me on, hey, let's go take a BioClear course and see what that's actually about. I know, dude. I know, that's
George
what I thought too.
Just rolling over right now hearing
I know George hates clinical stuff, but I promise you, I was watching this, that makes total sense.
Yeah,
like the bevel margins and
So my take on BioClear at this point is that like posterior BioClear makes sense to me. I don't do it at all, but I think it's a pretty cool technique. I like everything about it. I've gotten to do some hands-on stuff with it. Anterior BioClear, I don't know if you guys have seen the aesthetics.
I agree completely with what you're saying.
I cannot stand the way that the matrices handle, especially with the emergence from the soft tissue and the line angles. Like, I don't love anterior BioClear. So I think for posteriors, I think it's a really cool technique. And if you're going to go all in and do it, that's great. I'm also in a state, Indiana, where we have expanded function dental assistants who do the restorative side of things. So for me, that would be, if I was to like truly drink the Kool-Aid, I'd be sending them all to those, courses and having them learning it. Which if that's like what you're passionate about and you feel like that's the right thing to do for your team and for your office, I think that's awesome. But that's, it's great. And I think there's a lot of good techniques to be learned there. But I have not drunk the Kool-Aid yet. I've just sipped it, and it was all right. It was all right Kool-Aid. So, in terms of me, I have definitely not taken any CE courses. So I'm still recruiting for the Army virtually. So for a certain number of hours per day, my commander has said, he's not asking all 8 hours of our home time that we normally would be giving, but for a window every single day, I'm doing digital Army recruiting and then managing a lot of the managerial decisions around the practices and everything that's going on with the crisis, and then the podcast and the website redesign. So my 3 jobs that I normally have are now like 2 jobs. I've kind of like condensed a little bit, so, but I'm still surprisingly busy. And then obviously I'm here and the kids are coming in and out and I'm helping Christine, and it's weird working from home and balancing when you have like an infinite amount of work you could be doing on projects and websites and podcast with being home and being present and taking care of your responsibilities. So I am less stressed, but still some stress levels there. So especially with the practices and everything, the decisions we've had to make. So this document is 100% something that someone can look through if they're like, man, I want to go back to season 2 and like revisit some of those acquisition concepts or the valuation concepts. This would be a great document to sink your teeth into, to take notes. If you guys have questions after reading this document or topics that you want to go in more depth on, shoot us a message, shoot us an email. Do you guys have an intake email for the Pursuit of Ownership? I should know this.
We do. It is sptheinterns@gmail.com. And if you were to send us an email, it would be the first one we've ever received, which is a pretty prestigious position. I would recommend it. You may be mentioning on the
send us one.
Just wide open. Send them some friggin' emails. Just ask some questions.
Could I add one more thing about the podcast?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think probably my biggest takeaway from doing this whole Word document was just the linear structure of the podcast. Like I don't feel like there's any other podcast that's even remotely close to this structured. And if anyone ever asks me they want to learn about practice ownership, which podcast they should look at, it's this one by far. Cool. Going through the seasons, it made me realize like this podcast solely took me from knowing almost nothing in practice ownership to, I would say, 95% of what I know now. So it's just really an incredible body of work, and you guys have done some awesome stuff here.
Thank you. No, that makes us really happy to hear. And just also know that once you get into practice ownership, you'll then realize like, crap, I thought I knew a lot, but the actual execution, the actual leading, the making the decisions, the balancing your clinic time with your leadership time and being a good leader to your team is so much harder than it sounds on a podcast. So there's plenty of learning to be done, but we're glad we've given you some of a foundation there.
Absolutely. Yeah, the learning never stops.
Well, this has been a fun The Pursuit of Ownership episode. And really, please send us some emails, sptheinterns@gmail.com. Did I get it right?
Yes. Yep. Please send.
We'll dedicate an episode to your email or at least, however long that gives us.
You'll get on the show, guaranteed.
You'll get on the show. Yeah. It'd have to be a really good question for an entire episode. But Peyton, thank you for creating this resource. Thank you for jumping on. This was a lot of fun. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care, guys.
See ya.
We'll see ya.